Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us. Off the bat, I'd like to make sure all the attendees are aware that we're recording the forum so that we can make the conversation, the information here available to more of our members and the public and in our coalition. This nonpartisan voter education forum features candidates running to represent the 5th district on the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors. And the forum will focus on issues related to transportation in the Sacramento region. My name is Glenda Marsh, and I'm a co-founder and chair of Sacramento Metro Advocates for Rail and Transit, otherwise known as SMART. Community members and leaders established SMART in 2019 to be a not-for-profit coalition of business, labor, transportation, environmental, neighborhood, faith-based organizations, and community leaders. Our mission is to educate, organize, and advocate for expanded and improved rail and transit services for the Sacramento region. And our vision is that most all residents and visitors in Sacramento County will live, work, and play within walking distance or a transit stop from everything they need. Our vision for this candidate forum is that District 5 voters gain a better understanding of where candidates stand on certain key issues related to the provision of public mass transportation in our county. The Board of Supervisors is the governing body of the County of Sacramento, and it's empowered to adopt ordinances, establish programs, levy taxes, appropriate funds, appoint certain officials, and zone property within the county. Because of these powers, board members play a significant role in building a transportation network that works for all residents and visitors in our region. Before I turn things over to our moderator, I wanted to be sure to thank the American Public Transportation Association, a national nonprofit that shares SMART's vision and provided us grant funding to make today's conversation possible. With that, I would like to turn things over to our moderator, Frank Turan, to get things started. Hope you're muted, Frank.
Sorry about that. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Frank Turan, and I am on the steering committee for SMART. Today's forum will give all candidates the opportunity to answer pre-prepared questions related to transit issues in the Sacramento region. Each candidate will have equal time to respond to the same questions. For question 1, we will ask candidates for their response in alphabetical order by last name. Question 2 will then follow the reverse order, and we will alternate from there. We ask that each candidate keep their responses to under 2 minutes in length to ensure we have time for each candidate. Our timekeeper, Kat, will send a message in the chat noting when you have 30 seconds remaining. If necessary, I may step in if we exceed the allotted time per response to keep us on track. Upon the completion of the pre-prepared questions, we will have some time to answer questions from the audience. Audience members, please use the chat feature to ask your question. And just to let you know, tonight's recording will also be published on Facebook at a later time. A staff member will then receive your question. Please keep questions related to transit issues in the Sacramento region. Also, please refrain from using the chat feature for side conversations, as all of the messages flying around can be distracting for participants and attendees watching the meeting. So with that, I think we can begin. The first question is meant to double as an introduction. So please introduce yourself and tell us one way you believe public transit can benefit District 5 residents and businesses. And with that, we will start with Pat Hume.
Great. Thank you, Frank. And thank you for inviting me to participate this evening. Good evening. My name is Pat Hume. I grew up in the South County since I was 5, and public service is in my blood. My father was a pilot in the Air Force and a career officer, reaching the rank of colonel before his untimely death in the line of duty. His father was city manager of Chico for 20 years, and my maternal grandfather was on the Elk Grove Unified School District Board for 2 decades. This is not an ego play for me. It's not a stepping stone to other political office. I am running for county supervisor in order to go to work for the residents of Sacramento County. and I'm the most qualified candidate for the job. I've seen the region grow, change, struggle, thrive, and experience opportunities and setbacks. I've been a council member in Elk Grove for 16 years now. I served on the Planning Commission since incorporation in 2000. Prior to that, I've also served on the Sacramento Regional Transit Board of Directors since I was elected, and I was their representative to the Paratransit Inc. board, and am currently the president of that board even after their split from RT. I'm also the chair of the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority, which is looking to expand heavy rail passenger service into the Sacramento area. And I served on the Sacramento Transportation Authority for about a decade, including during the last two efforts to try and get a transportation tax passed by voters. Public transit obviously already benefits District 5, but there's more that can be done. Primarily, transit equals mobility. It can offer a viable alternative to cars, and it plays a role in economic development when it's implemented well. The important thing is that it's safe, clean, and convenient for the riders. It also needs to be frequent enough that planning for its use doesn't become a barrier of its own. I look forward to a robust discussion about transit and ways that we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we will go ahead and move on to Alex Joe.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, SMART members of the community, family, and friends. I'm here because you are here. I believe the science. As such, I have the greatest respect for what we do and what we can do to garner innovative leadership to address sustainable and flexible strategies. The 6 counties and 22 cities must collaborate to meet the utopian outlook fashioned as ideal. In that regard, innovative leadership is key, paired with willingness to act incrementally where necessary to address, achieve, succeed in using community dollars for plan, design, build, and maintain successes long-term. I come to this job opportunity as a former member of a school board, but at the same time, I'm a retired military planner in Signal Corps. I'm a teacher, retired after 30 years in the classroom. So I am a collaborator, and I can work with the system established within the county to create opportunities for us to make substantial changes and be innovative at the same time without injuring or axing someone's opportunity for success. We can collaborate, we can make this work. I feel like I am available for that purpose, and I'm running in this race to make it possible for us to advance and to make the Sacramento region more safe and environmentally protected area with respect to our transportation opportunities, including the rail and other features of highway construction and the use
I'm sorry,
of
Mr. Joe, but we're out of time.
transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and now Steve Lee.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Marcia, and the whole SMART board and panel, and also members of the community that are joining us this evening. So my name is Steve Lee. I'm a candidate for County Supervisor, District 5. And let me start off with this. You know, I envision a world in which I can actually jump on light rail in the South County, be able to get to the airport and not necessarily have to drive. I dream of a world in which I could perhaps walk to a rapid bus system, transit that would be able to get me to downtown. The problem that we're facing in Sacramento County is that we're not quite there yet. I come to you as a twice elected mayor of the city of Elk Grove. I served before that as a city councilman. Even before that, I served as a school board member. My breadth of experience in public policy is a lot wider than any candidates in this particular race. I also wear a different hat. I work for Juvenile Hall as a school counselor. I've been doing that for 23 years. And I've also am a farmer. I have a family farm, and that's something that I'm real proud of. But all of this in totality is a nice reminder that this is a job in which we have to be in tune with the working man and woman and individuals, families in the Sacramento County that would be able to reduce the poisonous gases, the impact on the environment, and to be able to get to their job. Fact of the matter
30
is that
seconds, Mr. Lee.
the vehicles, am I out of time, Frank? Is that what it is?
30 seconds.
Okay. All right. Well, that being the case, we'll have more of a discussion, but at least that's an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, and so then for question 2, we'll actually start back with Steve Lee and then work our way back to Pat Hume. This question, as you know, District 5 is a collection of urban, rural, and small town communities with unique transit needs. How would you make public transit more accessible and affordable for working families, disabled residents, school children, and seniors in District 5 communities?
I think one of the most important things to acknowledge is that our county is very diverse. Diverse in terms of development and, rightly, as you described in District 5, we have rural and we have areas that are very dense. That being the case, we have to have a prescription as to what is necessary. Obviously, if somebody's living out in Wilton, they're not going to need a bus to come out. But at the same time, if you look at the bulk of Elk Grove, or areas in which Rancho Cordova, there are some dense areas, and those are ways in which we can prescribe an effective way to move people. And the way I see it, public transportation is about moving people efficiently. And how we do that is to really think forward and think about 20 years from now. Can we really be able to get on a bus or on light rail in Elk Grove or in Rancho Cordova or in Galt or in Wilton to be able to get to the airport in a timely manner? That's my grand, my 10,000 feet vision. The difficult part, obviously, is getting there. And it certainly has not been easy. And as the mayor, one of the things that I champion in Elk Grove is to be able to consolidate our E-Tran with RT. And I think that that's an example of what we can actually be in a position to be able to look at some federal grants, to be able to look at some opportunities to bring the possibilities to District 5 and all of Sacramento County. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. The best way to deal with the merging of these various public transit opportunities is to stay within the SACOG rule base, the varied interest that SACOG represents, to include the resident air quality management districts, transit organizations, and there are many, public works, local government, federal, state, and federal state transportation agencies, and of course the stakeholders, the landowners, builders. Now, this has to be coordinated with infrastructure improvements. And as we are fully aware, we have roads and bridges and parts of our highways which are in need of great repair. Those corrections, those improvements will guide much of our effort in making this urban, rural, small town community more cohesive. Bike trails and bike lanes and changing some of the rules in terms of the transit activities that take place, creating more opportunities for people to make contributions by saying what it is that they think is good for their neighborhood.
30 seconds, Mr. Joe.
Let's communicate, let's collaborate, and let's make it possible for these transitions to take place as smoothly as possible.
Okay, now we're out of time. And Mr. Hume, you are up.
Thank you, sir. This is a great question because there's a large swath of District 5 where it doesn't make any sense, nor would we ever be able to afford to offer mass transit services, which then, if we focus on the second part of the question, we can drill down to focus on providing options for those who will benefit most from it. This struggle is a very real issue within the transit world. And District 5 provides a microcosm where we can frame the issue. And so the dilemma is the push-pull between frequency and coverage. And so when you think about that in terms of District 5, if we spent our time and money trying to get transit service down to Ileton or out to Harold or Wilton, as has been mentioned, we would end up with great coverage, but the cost and low utilization would come at the expense of better frequency elsewhere. This is an extreme example, but it plays out in our urbanized areas as well. And so it's very costly to try and run transit into every neighborhood, and usually results in very poor usage because it's not convenient. Instead, I have been a proponent to focus on frequency. If we used our limited resources to create a robust network focused on frequency, I think that creates a more viable offering for the ridership. The idea behind this is that one can get themselves to the nearest transit stop and have assurance that they will be picked up in a reasonable amount of time. The principle behind this is kind of the idea that the bus will be by any minute.
30 seconds.
And so rather than having to plan your day around the limited times that it's available in your neighborhood. So then we can augment this robust network by other options where we're working smarter, not harder. But we'll talk about that with a future question. Thank you.
Can I
All
add
right,
to that?
and go ahead, I'm sorry.
Frank, may I make a statement?
Sure.
I hear what Pat says, and I think that in terms of the spread of the development, it should be incremental. And I mention that because we have a classic example of incremental development, which was based on growth and is exampled by the rapid transit, our train system, right? The light rail made incremental moves as the development of the communities were transitioning. Larger populations require more service, thus the service was provided and it expanded accordingly. Go Pat.
Mr. Lee, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly in my statement, in my answer, that is, I've highlighted prescribing specifically for different areas. You know, it's not a one size fit all. I think that District 5 is diverse enough where you have to try to prescribe exactly what is necessary. What I'm talking about is a vision for 20, 30 years down the line. If we don't start thinking about it now, how are we going to react when the residents are asking, how come there isn't this? And so my position really is forward thinking, not just responding and putting a Band-Aid on the current situation, but really looking to the future and trying to figure out how we can actually build towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and now we can move on to question 3, and we will start with Pat Hume and then continue on to Alex Joe and then Steve Lee. Question 3, what type of innovative transit projects would you seek to prioritize? Again, that's what type of innovative transit projects would you seek to prioritize?
So I think, you know, today with our current technologies and employment environment, the biggest promise is in the on-demand transit space, where we have implemented Smart RT Ride, microtransit with regional transit. It seems to be widely used and successful. And it's based off the similar model that how paratransit initially and now RT handles their disabled transit service. And while we can't implement that same model to scale, given the high cost to provide one-seat door-to-door rides for that community, I believe we could put resources towards making this type of service more cost-effective, if not exclusive rides. And the first step would be to invest in scheduling and mapping software. I mean, if Amazon can figure out how to keep their Prime customers happy by offering same-day delivery, I'm sure we can figure out how to get people where they need to be with similar efficiency. And so ultimately, this on-demand service would provide a part of that coverage equation, probably at a lower cost and better frequency than typical fixed route transit. So I can envision a future where this type of arrangement provides better first mile, last mile service as well to work as capillaries off of the main public transit arteries. And so another thing that I've been working on that is really more back to the basics is expanding heavy rail passenger service into this region. And I think that's an example of where transit plays an important role in economic development by opening up the mega region for employers and employees to have flexibility where they work and where they live. So those are the two spaces I would focus on initially.
Thank you, Mr. Joe.
I would stay with the rail concept. I think rail has great benefits in terms of its ability to serve, provide a means of transportation that is flexible enough, cost effective, especially as we've got a manufacturing plant right here in the Sacramento area to be able to support the concept. You're talking now about the climate change. Everything is revolving around the need to reduce greenhouse gases and to deal with the ozone layer and to deal with other shortages and problems as a result of our past experiences. We have transit, rail transit, which is expandable by adding a car. We have transit here that can create the easiest way for us to be at least harmful to the environment itself with that light rail service. So we've reached Folsom, we've reached the northern part of the county with the Watt service, and we're in Elk Grove. We need to expand. We're in South Sacramento. We need to expand Elk Grove because this is an area where most of the growth will take place in future years. It makes sense to use that as our best approach to an innovative transit project.
Thank you. And Mr. Lee.
So what I'm interested in essentially is long-term. How do we create a robust public transportation system that would be able to meet all the needs? Yeah, I get it. I mean, having, putting a Band-Aid on the current situation, having the flexibility to be able to map out routes for specific individuals or groups of people in the rural areas, that makes sense. And I certainly would continue to support that. But I think what essentially is noteworthy is the United States is behind in public transportation. I had the opportunity to travel to Paris, France. I had the opportunity to travel to China and to see where these countries are ahead. And when we start looking outside of the box and looking at some of the other public transportation elsewhere in other countries, that's when we'll begin to learn how to move people. Because the fact of the matter is, in some of these countries, there's a lot more people than here in the United States. So light rail, we've got to invest into that. We got to make sure that people will be able to use that. But at the same time, in the rural areas, have a specific prescribed method of transportation for them. I would continue to support Smart RT. But at the same time, we also have the flexibility with Uber and some of these other options, private ride shares as well. And so those are Band-Aids for the problem. But the key here is to be able to have the vision to look at the possibilities of creating a robust public transportation that would be able to address all the needs. Thank you.
All right, and we can stay on you, Mr. Lee, for question 4, and that is in California, Sacramento is ranked 10th for bicycle collisions, 6th for bicycle collisions for those under 15 years of age, and 7th highest for overall traffic fatalities and injuries. This is especially hazardous in low-income, disadvantaged neighborhoods where a high proportion of fatal and serious car and pedestrian crashes occur. What types of programs, policies, or investments could lower these figures?
So I had the opportunity to tour some of the smart cities abroad. And one of the things that really caught my attention is bike lanes that are actually sheltered from the road. The problem that we have here in the States, and particularly in the Sacramento region, is that these bike lanes are open. A simple swerve would take out a biker. And I think that that is alarming. In order for us to truly believe and invest in this, what we have to do is really look at ways in which we can build a barrier. Yes, it would be costly, but if we don't build it now, we're going to be asking, why didn't we do it, back then? And so when I look at that, I have found that that particular model is of particular interest, and I would be spearheading that if given the opportunity to really look at some of the other ways in which bikers can actually get around. Bear in mind, I'm an Aggie, a graduate from UC Davis, so I love biking. I'd rather bike, but where we're at right now is it's extremely dangerous for bikers to be on the road, sharing the road with vehicles. And I've seen it so many times before. We've had incidents here in Elk Grove. I've had friends who have been victims of being hit by a vehicle that just wasn't paying attention. Going in the direction of green, going the direction of encouraging people to be active, to be mobile, to be on their bikes, we really have to build the infrastructure so that it would support them.
Thank you. Mr. Joe?
Yes, safety is cause célèbre here. We meet safety through slowing down. You know, the question portends to outline the problem of biking. And it's true that collisions would be high, especially with that 15-year-old age group. That's a pretty seventh highest overall traffic fatalities and injuries is an avoidable problem. I think that reminding people of safety measures, enforcing existing law related to under 18 age bicycle riders. What do they do? Well, they wear helmets. What do I do when I ride a bike? I wear my helmet, I wear gloves, okay, just to be safe. I jokingly tell people who I see who are not wearing helmets that they can buy one at the thrift store for $3. Further, I suggest they have gloves and knee pads and ankle protection and the like, just as part fun, but mostly as a reminder that they can do better. So we have to do that. When I ride my motorcycle, I see the alert sign saying motorcycle safety, look out for motorcycle riders, you know, and that is important. So these kinds of reminders are helpful. That's what the government should be doing, providing safe opportunities for people. If we expand the bike lanes, Steve mentioned having them sheltered. Some of that could work here in different parts of the community and state. He mentioned travel. Our folks in the county employ would need to go find places where successes are happening and bring those back, and let's model that same success right here within the budgetary guidelines that are available and required. Invest in new technologies and continue the march forward by doing the communication piece, talking to SABA, the bike organizations throughout the community, and asking them what is best for them. And then let's model those best practices that they suggest.
Mr. Joe and Mr. Hume.
Thank you. Yeah, so distracted and aggressive driving is a serious problem, and it seems to have worsened during the pandemic. We've had 2 fatal accidents in Elk Grove in recent weeks, following which I connected our police department with the governor's representative at the Office of Traffic Safety to explore innovative programs that could be funded by the state. Unfortunately, all of the options center around education, enforcement, or physical changes to the environment. And there are a lot of drivers who have no respect for each other, the law, and are just not being careful of others using our transportation system. So the question becomes, how do we compel better behavior without choking down the efficiency of the system so much that we're creating a greater frustration that now that could fuel more bad behavior? So we've done things in Elk Grove like implementing painting the bike lanes green where they intersect with traffic, just to raise that visibility, bring it front of mind for people. We've tried to implement physical separation of sidewalks to protect pedestrians so that they're not walking right adjacent to speeding cars. And then we've really been trying to improve our off-roadway trail network throughout the city. But the easiest and most innovative solution I've seen in the urban area is using the parallel parked cars to act as the physical barrier between traffic and the bike lanes. And while that isn't an option everywhere, it's a prime example of how thinking differently led to a relatively low cost solution that's very effective. With respect to disadvantaged communities, which was another part of this question, I think the issue really comes down to investment and reinvestment. According to studies, road disrepair and congestion also contribute significantly to vehicle, bicycle, pedestrian collisions. So we have to find another funding mechanism or incentive package to backfill the void left by the dissolution of redevelopment agencies. The state took away this mechanism, which was as a valuable tool to direct resources into deteriorating neighborhoods. There is a lot of unutilized and underutilized land that would drastically help infuse activity and improvements if we can figure out how to bridge the gap to make it pencil for reimagining.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Hume. And now we're going to stay with you for the next question. And that question is, what link do you see between public transit service and social and economic equity?
Yeah, so aside from the frequency coverage debate that I mentioned earlier, this is another big conundrum in the public transit world, at least from where I sit. And that is public transit a social program, or is it part of public infrastructure? And how we view that question has an effect on how we approach its funding, our expectations of cost recovery, and our implementation. And in reality, it really is both in some respects. Personally, I view public transportation as the lifeline and a vital mobility option for those who need it most, either from a socioeconomic perspective or mental or physical impairment. If this is the focus, then there's equity and parity baked into that, because it's society providing for a common use, not just a service. The unfortunate thing is that many non-transit riders simply don't see the value in how much it costs for what we provide. A common quip, if you will, when we were discussing the transportation tax measures is that unlike the dedicated folks of this group, there are a lot of voters who would vote for public transportation funding to do so to get those people out of their cars, so it makes the roadways easier for them to drive. And sadly, there's some truth in that, because the cost to value ratio is not apparent, and we don't view transit as a utility or infrastructure. You know, people, sorry, I was looking at the time over there. People expect roads to be smooth. They expect the trash to be picked up. They expect water to come out when they turn on the faucet, but they deride transit as a wasteful example of public funding. I think that's because, one, we're not making the case better, and two, we're not providing the best product as often as possible. So we need to focus on making transit clean, safe, efficient, and frequent.
Thank you. Mr. Joe?
Yes, the link between public transit service and social and economic equity involves a couple of areas. And I would just provide example here, do for Del Paso Heights as we do for Fair Oaks. Now, that's firestorm kind of language, but in reality, we're talking about justice. We're talking about social equity. We're talking about economic equity, and we're talking about environmental equity. Once you leave that on the table, you'll have a broader discussion, and you'll have a greater opportunity to get to a point where you can bridge the gap and create the types of services that are in the wealthier communities in the lower income communities, and attempt in some way to bring some parity, which is needed to qualify people in the lower income areas, the social problem areas, and improve their lives, give them an opportunity to get out and to move and to go to work, and to have systems that are in place that they can rely on, that provide for them opportunities to improve their lot in life. That is not always the case in our deliberations and in the type of activities that we do from a county perspective. And in terms of all of the transit programs and systems that are in place, we still have areas where deficits exist where they should not exist. So if I'm championing the need for a public transit system that bridges the gaps and provides social and economic equity for people, I would say that we need to focus on those real problems, talk to the residents, and invite their comments to help create change opportunities to improve the system and give people an opportunity to grow their lots in life, help themselves to get out of the poverty situations that exist. And the reasonable board, the reasonable agency, the reasonable groups that are working toward these problems will hear those people and act accordingly. Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
So this morning, as part of my research, what I did was I went to the light rail station in South Sacramento. In the process of going over there, what I did was I went and filled up my tank. My compact truck, by the time I finished filling it up, it was over $100. Now, I'm very fortunate that even though it's tough, I'm able to pay for that. When I got to the light rail station, I had an opportunity to meet with a passenger. Her name is Martha. She shared with me that she's okay with me sharing her story. Martha is a single mom, and Martha lives with 3 kids, and sometimes her vehicle doesn't work, and it's just not reliable. So she is really rolling the dice every day to get to her downtown job. Is this an issue for those that need it? Absolutely. Is this a social program that we can actually address? Absolutely. Is this a program in which we can actually expand so that people could jump on a public transportation to be able to get to their work and reduce the pollution in the air? Absolutely. This is a complex solution to it. And as I have said before, in order for us to properly address it, we have to make sure that we prescribe it depending on the neighborhood and the density of the community.
Can I add just a little bit to this conversation quickly?
Yes, go ahead.
It ties into what Steve was just talking about, and it puts a highlight on what Alex was saying relative to the disparate communities. And that is, I think we should start by having a serious conversation of how we provide the best transit to those who need it most first, and then we can look at how we make it more attractive to more affluent or choice-based riders. Because if we're providing a bus in service in Carmichael for less than a handful of people to use, we may be denying a bus on the route that runs up and down Stockton Boulevard, which is the heaviest used bus route in the RT system.
Mr. Joe, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely do. I would say that the smart ride services that are provided by RT are in some ways support for moving the individuals who may not be as financially able as the people who are paying to ride, students and elders and general public riders. So you have another vehicle system that could serve our purposes too, if expanded where those areas of need exist.
Yeah, okay, well, we're doing really well on time. I just wanted to remind all the candidates in the room tonight just to continue to check the chat box where our timekeeper is marking in, the time limits. And we happen to be on question 6. So I believe we left off at Steve Lee. So this question will begin with Steve, and then we will work our way back to Pat Hume. So question 6, clean air and preserving and maintaining existing roadway capacity is vital to livability and stewardship of public money. What targets and policies should the county include and require in its climate action plan to prioritize transportation modes that reduce vehicle miles traveled and reduce air polluting emissions from transportation? Mr. Lee, you're up. 2 minutes.
The most important part that we have to acknowledge is, look, there's going to be more people. Unless something dramatic happens, we're going to have to be able to accommodate for more people. As people, as our population begin to burst, what we're going to be facing is how do we move people from point A to point B? That is a given. We talked about, vehicle miles traveled. I get that. But one of the most important part is if you look at communities like the suburbs, like Elko, for example, we have no major employment center here. the biggest employer would be the school district. If you start looking at that, you begin to realize that in order for us to address that on a long-term basis, we have to make sure that we are in a position to welcome employers that would be able to be housed in the city of Elk Grove or in these suburbs where people can actually walk to them. And I'm not just talking about retailers. I'm talking about major employers that pay prevailing wages. That's key, and I think that's one of the major methods in solving pollution and addressing it. Yes, we can talk about public transportation. That is something that we ultimately still have to have. We can talk about the band-aids, the prescribed transportation, smart RT that would be able to pick up individuals. But ultimately, when we're looking at the community as a whole, we know for a fact that there's going to be more people. The traffic is going to be more of a problem. And so as part of the steward, being a steward of the public's money, you really have to be planning ahead, and thinking what in the event where Wilton no longer is Wilton. Wilton is like Elk Grove, and Elk Grove is like San Francisco. It will happen. These are things that, as sure as the sun will come up, our communities will grow. And so those will be the way I would approach it.
Thank you. Mr. Joe.
I'll tag on to what Steve said and add that the Apple landscape, the Slakey Brothers and North State University are large employers in the community as well. In this clean air and preserving and maintaining the existing roadway capacity question, I take exception to the preserving and maintaining existing roadway. My push is for developing new roadway. And I know that it is possible to do that, but I'm not certain. I think the resources are available and the will is the missing element. So we have the concept. We know that we need to connect neighborhoods better to be able to reduce the amount of miles traveled by individuals who can just drive through some area presently not being utilized and make their commute much shorter. The problem that I have with traffic in Sacramento is that it's stressful, and stress contributes to physical injury, creates problems, road rage as an example. So these are problems that we could avoid if we were consciously looking at solutions that would cost money. If we're going to protect our air, use electric vehicles, I mentioned this in a prior forum, and it was stated that the existing vehicles are still on the road. But the difference is if we are creating new corridors, we're accomplishing both. We're reducing the amount of pollutants, the greenhouse gases that are emitted from our ICE vehicles, and we are then using different routes which move traffic much faster, and it reduces the burden on systems in general to be able to move people from place to place. Let me note too that your average electric vehicle is going to probably weigh somewhere like 440 pounds heavier than 440 pounds heavier than your classic ICE, but it has less problematic issues with respect to repair and long-term usage. Now, given that the implementation of more efficient roadways and arterials and corridors will help solve the problem in both instances.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. I'm sorry, but we're out of time. Mr. Hume.
Yes, thank you. So I agree wholeheartedly with the first part of this question. Many times in the past few years, I have tried to shout from the rooftops how important roadway capacity is going to be in the future, even as we electrify or move to more efficient modes of transit. Using a vehicle with no emissions is great for air quality, but it does nothing to lessen congestion. And so vehicle miles traveled it's a little misunderstood in the context of transportation planning with respect to our old standard of level of service. So simply put, the level of service focused on how easily traffic moved, whereas VMT only concerns itself with how far traffic goes. And so the difference is under the VMT model, whether it takes you 1 minute or 1 hour to go 1 mile, 1 mile traveled is 1 mile traveled. And so as we transition to a personal and commercial fleet that is more electric or just produces less emissions, if we're not also focused on capacity, then we are building ourselves into greater congestion, which, unless you're talking about a 100% clean air vehicles, it would be disastrous for our air quality. And so as far as county policies, a lot of it centers around land use and infrastructure. First, and we'll talk about this a little more in one of the future questions, but it's important to recognize the value in having where people are and where they want to be, either close together or easily traversable. And so when it comes to locating uses near one another, some are more feasible than others. Obviously, residential and minor commercial are the easiest. It's more complicated for residential and office, and even harder for major commercial, entertainment, and regional recreation uses, given the populations that they need to serve. So we've done some things in Elk Grove that can be scaled up to make transportation more efficient countywide. The first is the use of roundabouts, which I've long been a champion for. They allow for greater throughput, reduce idling time, and generally function better than up to a certain volume. And also we've focused extensively on our intelligent transit traffic system and real-time information center so that we can adjust and make things flow more smoothly. So this is in no way an exhaustive list, but doggone, it's hard to even fit anything meaningful in less than 2 minutes.
Totally
May I
understandable.
comment?
We are out of time. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question.
May I comment?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes, please.
Briefly, I'll say this for clarity. The use of electrics and hybrid vehicles on the existing roads is correct, that the congestion doesn't change, but the development of new corridors is the real key issue right here. And that's where we have not had much in the way of transit revolutionary activity in the county, and the vast majority of the change or the supposed help comes at the expense of Watt Avenue. And as I had stated in past conversations, it really is a matter of not expanding Watt Avenue anymore, but finding other corridors. That's how you reduce the transit, the number of vehicles, the transit congestion. You change through creating the new corridors, bring in the electric vehicles, bring in the hybrids, bring in the bicycle lanes, bring in the light rail. So there are things that can be done. Again, I say the solutions are here, the resources are here, the wheel is missing. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, did you want to
Yeah,
respond?
I just want to add is, look, the fact of the matter here is it's not one thing is going to be able to fix it. You know, as the two-time mayor in Elk Grove, I saw it. Even with the efforts in which Elk Grove has put forward, we still have traffic down here. And in order to properly address this, we have to really look at this with a multitude of approaches. You know, bring in employers down to Elk Grove or to areas in which we have a dense population. We have to encourage the use of electric vehicles. We have to develop the public transportation to the point where it is specific to that area. That's the only way we can actually reduce it. There is no one size fit all. There's no secret weapon that would be able to reduce traffic. The fact of the matter is that people like to drive. And, you know, since the invention of cars, people like the comfort of being the vehicle. How do we encourage them to be comfortable using public transportation? There's a lot of things that need to be done, and there are a lot of priorities that need to be set.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And Mr. Hume, for question 7, we're going to go ahead and start with you. Development decisions influence progress on SMART's vision of living, working, and playing in Sacramento County within walking distance or a transit stop from everything one needs. Do you support this vision? And where should the county concentrate on growth and development to promote this vision? For example, infill or greenfield, within the urban footprint, or at the edge of urban development?
Yeah, so this question picks up on some of the things I was talking about relative to having different land uses more convenient to each other. So I absolutely support the vision and concept. but I'm also pragmatic about some of the hurdles as we look to implement. But I would like to start first with a question of why is the county in the urbanization business in the first place? Sacramento County, some may not realize, is very unique in the state in that most counties are not in the municipal services business. And so we certainly can't unring that bell, but I like to sometimes start with maybe asking a question that people don't consider, that may not get considered otherwise. But back to the question at hand, assuming we're going to, the presumption that we're going to continue past practices, I'll only speak relative to District 5 because that's what I'm most familiar with rather than the county as a whole. But there are significant opportunities in the Vineyard and Gap area, as well as some of the planned growth that is set to take place along the Jackson Highway corridor. But for a long time, I've promoted using as long of a lens as possible when we're talking about regional planning and mapping out future planning so that we can roll it out in an orderly fashion rather than having to succumb to pent up pressures. And so I think we need to work with other governments and look at how we recreate and backfill the funding mechanisms that used to be available under redevelopment agencies, as I mentioned before, make it easier, more cost comparable to develop and redevelop some of the underutilized land within existing footprints. And we also must be mindful about consumer demand. If we're not diligent about providing a variety of housing stock throughout the region, then we're creating an unsustainable demand for the housing stock we currently have. And this is what causes gentrification and competition that drives up the cost of housing, cost of living, and makes entry points unattainable. And so I just heard a report from the Greater Sacramento Economic Council that our region is one of the fastest in the state to be rebounding out of the pandemic, and that we have one of the strongest 5-year growth projections. And so I've got a background in land use, and so I know how to look around the corners and be sure that we're setting ourselves up for planned orderly development to meet the needs of this growing region.
Thank you. Mr. Joe?
Yes, I think to tag onto what Pat said, the county may not be in the business of doing that he said, but it is in the business of modeling opportunities and growth patterns. We're inviting industry, we're creating solutions to problems, we're providing housing and other wealth activities for our citizens. Those are some major features of a government entity. Or you stagnate and you become irrelevant. So we have to do what is necessary by concentrating on where the growth patterns exist and how to take best advantage of them. With respect to the construction or the development decisions that Smart Visions for Living and Working have, we're in a very unique position in terms of having a lot of land available, which I think someone might challenge me on that. But the part that I want to establish is that long ago, I was a real estate agent, and in my work, I did a 1031 exchange, which was the first one done in my office for purposes of allowing a family to buy a condominium that we were converting from their existing or like-kind property. They were able to swap for our property. It's just a matter of writing the contract to establish it as a 1031 exchange under the IRS rules. So given that these kinds of concepts can be put into play to create the areas where we can develop properties, we can put different lots together to make them work for the development activities that we have in mind. And those are innovative ideas. Note too that we have a specialist group in the county employ with land use, and they are the experts. So as a county board of supervisor member, I'm talking to them to find out where their thinking is and how we can implement some of their great ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Lee?
So I'm the only one who has a family farm. And one of the reasons why I started that, and part of the reasons why I moved to South County, is to be able to show my boys while they were growing up that milk comes from dairy cows, not from the supermarket. I think that that is an important component of what Sacramento County is. We oftentimes do things and neglect and forget the fact that there are food growers in Sacramento County, particularly in the rural area, that we need to pay close attention to. My priorities would be simple: infill first, before we start looking at building a community out in the middle of Wilton, where you're going to try to figure out how to get the people back here to work, either in the downtown area, or how are we going to reduce the pollution in which they emit into the environment when they're driving all the way to San Jose to work. And so that's a fact, and that's what we struggle with. And so, that being the case, I oftentimes look at it and said, I mean, there's a reason why we like the open air. We like the open area. We like the fact that you can drive 5 minutes and be able to be on the dairy farm and be able to smell the cows, even though it's unpleasant, but still to understand and appreciate the contributions of farmers. And that's one of the things that's missing. And so that's why we're prioritized. If we're going to start building something, make sure we look at infilling first, look at opportunities in which we can condense some of this, and then some of the buildings and houses before we look into annexing other areas in the county.
Can I comment on the cow statement, please?
Absolutely. We're doing good on time.
Are we still on time?
We're doing, our time so far is doing pretty, we're doing pretty well. So go ahead.
I tutored a kid back in the 90s whose grandparents owned a dairy on Clay Station, in the Clay Station area. They fed their cows mucilage, and the combination of fruits and hulls and the like meant that their smell was sweet. Unlike the smell of the Harris Ranch cows that we pass by going on I-5 toward the Southland, I think that that probably is less methane producing, that use of mucilage, and it's certainly probably a better tasting product in the final analysis. Thanks.
Mr. Hume, did you want to add in anything?
There's a joke in here, something about fertilizer, but I'm going to let it slide and we'll just continue on.
Okay. All right. Okay. So for question number 8, we're going to go back to Mr. Lee. So here we go. And then we will go to Alex Joe and then Pat Hume. A group of construction businesses and labor unions have recently begun to collect signatures to qualify a measure for the ballot, which would raise the sales tax to fund transportation projects and services, including road maintenance, new roads, and expansion of light rail and transit services. Do you favor or oppose this measure, and why?
So the problem I have is the timing, and timing is everything. This is the wrong timing. We've got gas that's extremely expensive. We've got folks that are struggling. We have individuals that are coming out of COVID with family members who have passed. We're suffering. The community is suffering. This is not the time in which we should be looking at increasing sales tax. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not opposed to future possibilities, but this definitely is the wrong time, and I would oppose it at the moment.
Okay, Mr. Joe?
Yes. So when I read this, I was wondering who this group of construction businesses and labor unions were. I don't know that we have to worry so much about the measure for a ballot activity or a ballot measure to raise sales tax. I'm more interested in looking at the county's $4 billion budget. So short answer, I would reject this. In the interest of my concerns, I'm looking at where we are currently spending our $4 billion and determine through a simple analysis, not an audit, but a simple analysis of spending patterns. It seems to me like there are funds available in specific areas. There are several discretionary funds. There are problems related to lawsuits, which are being funded on an annual basis. These things can be wrapped, I believe, the annual hits with funding for these lawsuits can be taken as any other debt. You discount it, you pay it, you move forward. So those evaluations, I think, are going to be more instrumental in my mind than following the lead of a construction business or a labor union. I'm going to allow myself to see what exists within our current budgeting cycle and then make a decision based on what I think is appropriate for the county. In conjunction, I always say, with my 20% and the need to garner another 40% to make a decision possible with respect to what we do. But I do agree that we need new roads. And I've been championing that idea recently and currently this evening, saying new corridors. So let new corridors equate to new roads. And then let's start looking for that. How to expand light rail? Absolutely. How to deal with the transit service system? Talk to the people who ride. Talk to the drivers who drive. Talk to the planners. So let's go from the bottom up. Let's do some grassroots organizational opportunity, asking the correct questions and trying to create plans that are not too different from what SMART is doing right now. So in conjunction with the other activities, we have a lot of opportunity to really improve the system if we listen, collaborate, act.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Hume.
Yeah, so I'd have to answer that, my short answer is no, not right now. I mean, given the rising costs of living, inflation, gas prices, everything else, I just don't think it's the right time to be asking to raise taxes. We'll see if things, if the political environment and the economy improves between now and the deadline to put it on the ballot. But I've also heard that the Sacramento Council of Governments just released an analysis of the measure that could potentially be used by the opponents of the measure to derail it. And I've worked on the front lines of the last two attempts to get a measure passed or get it put on the ballot. So I certainly recognize the need that this new revenue would provide for transportation funding in the region. And while I haven't taken a close look at the current expenditure plan, I do know that from a past experience that it contains funding for a fix-it first strategy. For each of the jurisdictions, it contains some portion of roadway and public infrastructure improvements and some portion for public transits. And so conceptually, I recognize that our state and federal partners are not returning our money back to this region to meet our needs. But it seems like even under the best of circumstances, it's a hard time presenting a unified front to the voters to get behind a plan, even if it contains a little something for everyone to glom onto. So, we narrowly missed the first effort, we scrapped the second effort, and this third effort, even with the lower threshold as a citizens initiative, I don't see it happening right now.
And again, I want to thank all of the candidates for making time to meet with us tonight and participate in this forum. This concludes the questions that we prepared. We will now turn to the questions collected from the audience. There were a few that did come in through the chat box here. So we'll go ahead and start in the order they were received. The first question being, beyond providing basic mobility, who else may want to use transit more conveniently and regularly, and why? And Mr. Hume, we can start with you and then work our way to Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I think dependent on the quality of the transit you're providing, everyone should want to use it. Certainly I use it to go downtown for different entertainment functions or nightlife or sporting events. It's a convenient alternative. I don't have a work situation where it would work out for me fruitfully in that regard, but I think the more we can create a better option to use to get around the neighborhood, to get around the region, and then get around the larger part of the region. I think again, if it's clean, safe, convenient, and frequent, it is absolutely a viable alternative. And oftentimes, as was mentioned earlier, when I'm traveling, that is my primary mode of transportation to get around other cities. So it definitely works when you use it.
Mr. Joe.
Yes, Basic mobility. Let's start with the disabled people. Let's start with a kneeling bus. Let's start with easier access for them to allow them to enter front door, back door, find a spot to sit and relax while they are traveling. Youth, students. We have young children who ride, and we have older people who are college age students who ride. Certainly the working groups. I rode the bus to downtown Sacramento many days that I wasn't actually riding my bicycle to go to work for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I would say that the innovative use of the transit system here is going to be based on asking the right questions. We need to talk to folks. There may be some other need that we haven't thought about. So let's get out of the box and get into some opportunities to create more mobility opportunities for people that we do not yet know need these services.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Lee?
So
Yep,
aside from moving people from their homes to a workplace, I think one of the things that we oftentimes forget is individuals that want to jump on the train so that they can actually take a leisurely ride to their destination. I do that quite a bit. I'm a frequent rider with Amtrak, but the problem is that it is not a continuous ride. I oftentimes have to get off and get on these links and these connectors to be able to get to the next train station. And so that's one of the components that needs to be ironed out and be more efficient. But that's on a state level. I think the important thing to note here is that there are many others that will jump on light rail to get downtown. Oftentimes, my wife and I, when we go to shows, we do an Uber and we go downtown so that we don't have to be stuck driving or looking for a place to park. These are the type of opportunities in which we have to look to see how we can be able to make it attractive for individuals that perhaps maybe live on the outskirts of the metropolitan area that want to get into downtown to see a show. And aside from making sure that we have buses and light rail that would be able to accommodate those who are disabled, those who may need extra help, the elderly, being safe, being consistent, clean. These are all elements that come to be a part of having an effective public transportation system.
Can I add?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure. Steve, mixed use is the key here, and having to leave the bus and get on another form of transportation, leave the light rail, get on another form of transportation, leave the light rail and ride a bike. These are all elements within the transportation modality. As a retiree from the military, I would often fly space available. And man, I tell you, I would fly a distance and I'd have to ride a bus or rent a car or call a friend or do something else. And it's just a matter of making all of these pieces fit to be able to get where you're going. And I don't know that that's a major inconvenience for our people. Even people who are disabled can learn these processes and use the system to their advantage if they are available. So all of these pieces need to be in place for us to advantage ourselves of them and make mobility a problem less complicated for the traveler.
Okay, and it looks like we had two more questions that came in from the audience. I will post the next one in the chat. I guess as far as the order goes, I don't think it really matters. I can start with, we can start with Mr. Lee. Large portions of the city and county do not provide school transportation for K-12 students, placing burdens on working families forced to take kids to school in private cars. What is your vision for helping get kids to and from school in areas that do not provide transportation services to students?
I think one of the issues that we looked at when I was on the school board is I truly believe this is the responsibility of the school. I think that this burden should not shift to the regional transit or the city. The bottom line here is that we are a country that guarantees public education for all students. That being the case, there are students that need to be transported, either be students that have a special accommodation, students that need to get to school on time. This is a priority for school boards to properly address. And if the failure to address that really is the failure to provide the bridges for students to access the curriculum. I would certainly be pursuing a deeper conversation with school districts to make sure that that is addressed. But to balance that, in the meantime, if the school districts are not doing that, I think it's also important that we be in a position to step in, that being RT, that being the County Board of Supervisors. But from a philosophical standpoint, this is the priority of the school district.
Thank you, Mr. Joe.
Yes, as a school board member, prior to Mr. Lee coming on board, there were concerns about that. There were times when we did not bus in all areas. There are jurisdictional issues, census compliance, what have you, changing the routes. But there's also federal funding that should be coming in to provide for buses. And if you don't have it, if you cannot afford it, the district cannot afford it. And in the region at the time, there were several districts that did not have adequate funds to provide for busing for all the children. And in our case, children were coming in from Rancho Murrieta and the Wilton area and the outlying locations, which was a long bus ride, winter conditions, foggy. We had fog lamps on the buses to be able to provide the safety measures in those inclement weather conditions. But charter schools are not equipped to have transportation for their children to come to the class. And it is incumbent on the parent to be able to provide that service to get the children to school. Sadly, over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've had children who have been out of the loop, and it's not their problem, but it's the problem of the pandemic. And I don't want to get into that woeful story, but in terms of the opportunity for parents to make sure that their children get a quality education, sometimes you have to get in your car and drive. And I believe that the vast majority of people who are using charter schools and have situations where they need to provide for their own transportation for their child to go to school or their children to go to school, they bite the bullet and do what has to be done in the best interest of the child. At some point, there will be funding, okay, in a different era, and it just happens. These things are like waves. So they'll come in, and we've seen this in education. Steve can attest to this. We've seen this in education. Pat can attest to it. You have waves of funds that come in incrementally, or I should say intermittently, and you use them as they are available and use them for purposes that are the best interest of your population.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Hume, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to take the 2 minutes on this question. So I want to go back to the previous question for just a moment and talk about disruption and the fact that in the transit world, we need to be nimble and receptive to not just thinking outside the box, but blowing up the box and not relying on how the way things have always been done. We saw a considerable shift of people from their living arrangements and whether or not they have to go into the office for work coming out of the pandemic. And then we see the more disruption coming with autonomous vehicles and this type of a thing. And so we need to be nimble in that regard as far as we look at planning. Also, with respect to planning, we can discuss whether or not it's the public transit agencies or the school districts that should provide transportation. My number one priority goes back to SMART's vision of putting the uses closer to the people. I mean, my gosh, we need to make our communities safer, not only from a criminal standpoint, but also just from a transportation standpoint so that kids can walk and ride their bikes to school again. That's really what I think is that we ought to have schools closer to where the children are coming out of their houses, and so that make it the communities safer for them to get there without having to use a vehicle at all, other than maybe a bike.
Comment, please.
Yes, go ahead. Mr. Joe, you have the floor.
Right. So the truth of it is that there's availability. You're looking at the cost of doing business, and schools may not be close to the neighborhoods or where the children live, just by virtue of their opportunity to establish a school where space is available. And we've got charter and private schools that just exist in an area where land may be available, or the opportunity to build a structure is available, not consistent with the living arrangements, not your neighborhood school, in other words. So that's something that we definitely have to allow for, right? And make certain that we have a recognition that maybe supplements for transportation may be a potential key to allowing parents to get their kids to school if the need arises. And the compassionate approaches to allowing people to say, I need help, and then allow them to receive some support. Now, remind us that we have the Michael Tubbs example in Stockton, where there were funds provided for families, which stabilized them, which gave them some additional money, which reduced stress on the families, which provided them with opportunities to have their clothes cleaned and do some basic things to be able to load up their pantry. So these are helps that the government can do. And I'm not talking welfare here, but I'm just saying that there are ways that we can create. Patrick said, blow up the box. Okay, let's do that to make certain that we have opportunities for people to know that their government can work for them. And that leads me to say again that I believe that a review of the current budget, or the existing budget and the future budgets, is going to be instrumental in finding ways to support these concerns that this question raises.
Thank you. Okay, I will go ahead and move on to the next question that we collected from the audience, and I just posted it here. And we'll start with Mr. Hume and then work our way back to Mr. Lee here. How can public transportation incorporate the less fortunate? With the growing population of the homeless community, what kind of plans do you have for them? Mr. Hume, you have 2 minutes.
Well, there's no way I can pack a robust answer into 2 minutes. I'm not even going to try, but I will say that obviously, again, that goes back to the idea that in my mind, public transportation's first obligation is to provide mobility to the people who need it most. And that's whether they're housed or unhoused. You know, I think that we could delve further into how to address homelessness and what my plans are there, but that has very little to do with transportation and a lot to do with treatment and support and housing. And so I don't have a good answer for this question other than to go back to say that, again, it's looking at this is a form of public infrastructure that is available to all those who need it.
Mr. Joe?
If within Patrick's answer, I'm going to ask you to repeat the question.
Absolutely. How can public transportation incorporate the less fortunate? With the growing population of the homeless community, what kind of plans do you have for them?
I would say this, that the need to assess is going to be based on questioning individuals. If we're going to be solving the lower income issue first, we need to establish what the problem is and move on from there and come up with solutions. And a lot of that is questioning, getting answers, implementing whatever ideas are available. And I've said this several times tonight, communication is key. Communication is going to allow us to see what the problems are and then move on from that stance. You incorporate the homeless through that same process. Some people want to leave being homeless and get shelter, and some people do not. We've got a classic example of that in some of the churches that exist in the county. One in particular has tiny homes, which are in effect tough sheds that are being used to house individuals. They're 18 to 24 age group, and their objective in this, the church's objective in this, is to help individuals who are prepared to make appropriate changes in their lives. And getting out of a homeless situation for an 18 to 24-year-old has a lot to do with their financial situations, their home life, and their ability to adjust to change in their lives. And it is not a mental health issue. Now, I've seen the county advertising on air that mental health is a major concern, which is a curious position to take in light of the fact that we have a candidate who is speaking heavily about mental illness. So that being said, I would say this: people who are homeless do have concerns. They're stressed. They don't have jobs. They don't have housing. They don't have family. They don't have food. They don't have transportation. That is a burden that we must help solve. And it may be one individual at a time. Hey, are you ready to come off the street? Yes. Okay, let's go into this facility. Let's get you set for life. Let's try to get you training, get you a job, get you into a semi-permanent and then into permanent housing. Enjoying the needy with the opportunities that exist, or the opportunities that can be created to make it possible for people to have appreciable change in their status.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Lee, we have, I'm sorry, but we were out of time. Mr. Lee, you have 2 minutes.
In order for us to recognize the needs of the unhoused population, we really have to be assessing the individual. We oftentimes have a tendency to stereotype and saying they don't have homes. It's more than that. Sometimes they lack soft skills. Sometimes they choose to be healthy. The reason why I know is because I've actually spent time walking the canals out in Detroit, talking to those individuals that are unhomed. I met Cindy. Cindy told me that the reason why she's out there is because she is a meth addict. And I've also met John. John's out there because he said that after the war, he keeps seeing people that have died and he keeps talking to them. And so in order for him to be able to communicate with them, he needs to be out where it's quiet, out where his friends who have been killed can actually talk to him. These two individuals are in the same area, but they have different problems. In order for us to address public transportation, see how it can actually help the unhoused population, I can tell you this: working in social work for the last 23 years, working with the homeless students and foster student population, 20% of our population as a whole consistently use the services. That is a fact. And so that being the case, what we want to do is how do we position these programs to be able to address this? My policy is number one is housing first. Don't create all of these barriers for people to jump through, to be able to get into shelter. Get them into a shelter, and then you can address their mental health condition. You can address their soft skill, hard skill, get them cleaned up. You can then provide free bus passes so they can actually get to their work. That's how public transportation can be an asset to addressing the homeless population.
Can I comment?
Go ahead.
I would say this: the examples that you give, Steve, are extreme. The 16,000 to 16,500 to 20,000 homeless people are not meth-based or injured in some other fashion. They're just people who have had difficulties. Note that there are possibilities, great possibilities, that several more thousand people are just one paycheck away from being homeless or unhoused. And it's just circumstance. So those things have to be taken in consideration, and they have to be dealt with on a per case basis in a fashion that is consistent, and it's got the duration to be able to be effective, and it's got the funding to be able to have a positive impact on these individuals as they try to make it from one stage in life to the next, from being homeless to having permanent housing. And that's not even speaking of their animals and maybe their children or their spouses, and certainly their possessions. So I think a compassionate view of this process, a compassionate look at what people need, is going to be the key to solving the problem of homelessness and incorporating them into society again. They do not need another winter to be out on the street. They do not need another hot summer in Sacramento just simply trying to survive. So the government, us, the people who care, the citizens of the community often will come to the aid of these individuals, and we need to make sure that that happens by encouraging it and creating vehicles in terms of opportunities for people to join hands and do the right thing to be able to make progress and solve the problems. Sacramento Steps Forward has done the point in time count, and those are the numbers that I reference. But I'm saying to all of us that we have an opportunity here to make positive change. And as supervisors, that should be our mandate when we go into the board and when we talk to the other members and when we talk to the experts at the county level. Our job has to be to find solutions to problems and not find ourselves handcuffed. I don't want to use that term. Not find ourselves unable to make appropriate decisions to make positive change.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. And unfortunately, we are out of time with this question. We have one more question that we collected from the audience, one more for the evening, and then we will have to wrap things up. I will go ahead and post it now, and we're going to start with Steve Lee and then work our way to Patrick Hume. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. Here we go. This question is related to my grandmother who used her wheelchair her whole life. Regional transit and paratransit played a huge role in my family's life. What can you say about your plan to expand accessibility on transit for folks in District 5 and Sacramento County in general? Mr. Lee, you have 2 minutes.
Real simple. I support equal access to everyone. And I think that's one of the things that makes us stand out, as a country as a whole, and certainly, consistent with my philosophy, is what you want to do is you want to build the situation where everyone can actually access all of the services that is provided to the citizen. I would support it. Continue.
Very much. And Mr. Joe?
That is a wonderful story. It's a success story. More of same, exclamation.
And Mr. Kim, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, great. So again, having served on the regional transit and paratransit boards, and going back to what I mentioned as far as my overarching ideology regarding public transit, I mean, when you are talking about those who have no mobility, lacking transit, this is the primary role, is to provide them the mobility they need, not just to get to work, but to get to church, to get to entertainment, to go see friends, to get so that they aren't shut in their homes or the places where they're living. And it's one of the reasons why when we did have our own transit system in Elk Grove, I tried for years and years to get our e-van service, which was our paratransit service, to link with the regional paratransit service so that we could ignore the rules around transit planning that say that it only has to operate within so many a half mile, I believe, of a fixed route service. And we just looked at what was most comfortable and most convenient for the rider. And that is a 1-seat ride from door to door. And so that's what we've tried to provide with paratransit. That's what we are now providing with RT. And it is serving a community that transit is their lifeline and it is their path to happiness. And so I am glad to hear that it sounds like this audience member, that her grandmother had a good experience. And I would think that we need to look at how we refine and perfect that so that there are not late rides or late arrivals, that we can shorten the windows of time for when rides are expected to arrive and try and make that service as convenient and hassle-free as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Hume. And with that, we are unfortunately all out of time. I want to thank each of the candidates for joining us today and for their thoughtful responses. I also wanted to reiterate thanks to APTA for making today's conversation possible. The primary for this election will be held on June 7th, 2022, and it is not too late to register to vote. The deadline to register is May 23rd. Please visit registertovote.ca.gov to register or check your registration status. Lastly, thank you to all of the attendees who have taken the time out of their evening to become more informed about a crucial local election happening here in Sacramento. we hope you come away from this conversation with more information to make your decision. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciated hearing from everyone. It was very, very, very delightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Marcia.
Linda.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Thank you, Glenn. Ms. Marsh.
Thank you
Good
so
night.
much for coming and filling us in. Appreciate all the candidates.